10 incredible facts about the famous Titanic ship. On 15th April 1912, the world was left stunned by the news about the RMS Titanic had sank in the Atlantic Ocean, causing thousands to lose their lives. Just 4 days earlier, an enormous crowd of around 100,000 people had waved the ship and her passengers goodbye in Southampton ahead of the journey to New York. The ship, thought to be unsinkable, hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean and went down with around 2,200 passengers and crew on board. Barely 700 survived. Of course, we are all familiar with the story thanks to the 1997 James Cameron movie Titanic, which broke world records in cinemas. And although the ship is infamous for having sunk and being the subject of blockbuster film, there are many more interesting facts to be unearthed. Let's get started with the first one. The Titanic was thought to be unsinkable. The White Star Line claimed that the Titanic was unsinkable unofficially. The ship had 16 watertight bulkheads that would hold the ship afloat from bow to stern below the waterline, even if the first 4 of the compartments were breached. Sadly, at 11:40 p.m. on 14 April 1912, the lookout saw a towering iceberg directly in the path of the Titanic. The warning was transmitted to the bridge, where First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to place hard a starboard and reverse the engines. He also pulled the lever that closed the doors of the watertight compartment. But it was already too late. The Titanic grazed the iceberg on the starboard side 37 seconds after the lookout's warning, opening a series of cuts that extended through 6 consecutive watertight compartments 10 feet above the keel. 7 feet of water filled the first compartment within 10 minutes. Number 2. One of Titanic's funnels was fake. The ship's profile, which features 4 smokestacks, makes it one of the most recognizable ships in history. But the 4th smokestack served no purpose other than aesthetics. The 4th was a dummy installed because it made the ship look more beautiful and was made into a ventilation shaft for the kitchen. The first 3 smokestacks were actually connected to the furnaces that produced the smoke, but the 4th was not. The 4th stack functioned mainly as an air vent and as a way to add some symmetry to the ship's overall look. Number 3. Before the Titanic sinking, ocean liners encountered more icebergs than usual in the North Atlantic. Icebergs were a common sight between Ireland and Newfoundland. But in April 1912, a 2014 study published by the Royal Meteorological Society indicated that more of them were caused by weather conditions than normal. The southward flow of the Labrador Current off the coast of Newfoundland was met by freezing air from northeast Canada, leading to a torrent of icebergs that were swept further south than was normal for much of the 20th century. In 1912, the peak number of icebergs for the year was recorded in April, whereas normally this occurs in May. And there was nearly 2.5 times as many icebergs as an average year, the authors wrote. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic received several wireless messages from other ships warning of ice along their routes, but they never reached the Titanic's captain. Number 4. The Titanic's interior was based on the Ritz Hotel. The interior of the Titanic was modeled after the Ritz Hotel, with the first-class cabins finished in the Empire style. Aiming to convey the aura of a floating hotel, it was intended for passengers to forget they were on a board ship and feel as though they were in a hall of a great house on shore. Number 5. In first class, Titanic was a place of luxury. The liner had 4 restaurants, and passengers ate off of the 50,000 pieces of bone china crockery supplied by the Liverpool Stonier & Co. There were reading rooms, 2 libraries, 2 barber shops, and a photographic darkroom on board. A heated swimming pool was reserved for use by first-class passengers at 1 shilling at a time. There were also Turkish baths and electric baths, each for 4 shillings a time. A first-class passenger would pay €30 for a regular room, or €875 for a parlor suite. The majority of passengers, however, were in third class and paid between €3 to €8. There were just 2 baths for all the passengers in third class, many of whom were bunked in the 164-bed dormitory on Deck G. Number 6. Another ship was closer and could have saved more people. When the Titanic began sending out distress signals, the Californian, rather than the Carpathia, was the closest ship. However, the Californian did not respond until it was much too late to help. At 12:45 a.m. on April 15, 1912, crew members on the Californian saw mysterious lights in the sky. There were the distress flares sent up from the Titanic, and they immediately woke up their captain to tell him. Unfortunately, the captain issued no orders. Since the ship's wireless operator had already gone to bed as well, the Californian was unaware of any distress signals from the Titanic until the morning. By then, the Carpathia had already picked up all the survivors. The United States Senate inquiry and British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry into the sinking both concluded that the Californian could have saved many or all of the lives that were lost had a prompt response been mounted to the Titanic's distress rockets. The U.S. Senate inquiry was particularly critical of the vessel's captain, Stanley Lord, calling his inaction during the disaster reprehensible. Number 7. No one knows all who died on the Titanic. Although the official number of the dead on the Titanic was 1,503 of the 2,208 on board, over 100 unidentified bodies were buried on Fairview Lawn Cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Many people traveled under false names and from so many different places, it proved impossible to identify even the recovered bodies. Sidney Leslie Goodwin, a 19-month-old boy buried under the marker Unknown Child, was identified in 2008 after extensive DNA tests and a worldwide genealogical search. Number 8. The wreck was discovered after 73 years of the horrible incident. Efforts to locate and salvage the Titanic began almost immediately after it sank, but technical limitations as well as the sheer vastness of the North Atlantic search area made it extremely difficult. American oceanographer and former Navy officer Robert D. Ballard, who was based out of the Woods Hole Oceanographer Institution in Massachusetts, led his first search expedition in 1977, which was unsuccessful. In 1985, Ballard again set out to locate the wreck when he suddenly passed over one of the Titanic's massive boilers, lying at a depth of about 13,000 feet. The next day, the body of the ship was discovered nearby. It had split in two, but many of its features and interiors were remarkably well preserved. Hundreds of thousands of bits of debris were scattered in a 2-square-mile radius around the ship. The Titanic is now routinely explored, and several thousand artifacts have been recovered. Ballard, who was celebrated as a hero after the discovery, has led several more high-profile search expeditions, including of the RMS Lusitania and the USS Yorktown. Number 9. A drunk guy was one of the only survivors. One of the most famous Titanic survivor stories is that of Charles Jugan, the man who somehow drank his way through the Titanic disaster and lived to tell the tale. After the ship struck the iceberg and began sinking, everyone was panicking. While this was happening, Jugan was busy drinking all the whiskey he could find from the ship's liquor storage to prepare himself for the cold water. After he had enough drink, Jugan began tossing chairs overboard to be used as flotation devices. As the ship went down, he said he rode it down as if it were an elevator. He then spent several hours in the freezing cold water and lived to tell the tale. Number 10. You may see the Titanic sail again. Australian businessman Cliff Palmer established the Blue Star Line Shipping Company in 2012 to build a nearly exact replica of the Titanic called Titanic II, with the hope of completing the transatlantic crossing that the Crusaders never did. The Titanic II will be slightly larger than the original, with space for 2,400 passengers and 900 crew, while faithfully recreating its Edwardian opulence, even the Turkish bath. Fortunately for the passengers on the Titanic's II maiden voyage, tentatively scheduled for 2022, the ship will have plenty of lifeboats and comprehensive evacuation plans in case of icebergs.